Okay, guys. Hi there. Can we start with the third part of this session? Okay. My name is Igor.
I'm Brian.
This is Brian with me. So we're going to talk about some of the new stuff, stuff that was introduced to Angular in 1.2. This primarily will cover stuff like annotations, some enhancements to repeater, and security stuff, error messages. There is a ton of other things that we don't have time for, but these are things that we are the most excited about. So let's start with animations, because that's definitely one of the highlights of Angular 1.2. For a long time, you guys have been asking us to provide you with a way to do animations in Angular. And the way Angular does stuff, it takes care of most of the DOM manipulation for you. So this is awesome until you want to do animations, because that's when you actually need some hooks to make animations work in HTML. And we thought about this hard and looked at existing solutions, and also some proposals that were coming from community. And most of them were rotating around, like, provide us with callbacks so that I can do stuff when DOM elements are coming to the node, or when the DOM elements are coming to the document, or when they are leaving the document. And we didn't like this for several reasons. The two main ones were that this usually results in mixing the presentation logic and the business logic, which we feel very strongly about, that it's a bad thing for your application and for maintainability of the code. And the other thing is that this kind of animation code written in JavaScript is not fun to write. It's a nightmare, it's a boilerplate, and we thought we could do better. And Brian, what did we do?
All right, so we took kind of the same approach that Angular takes with directives in HTML, and we tried to apply that to animations with CSS. So we want to have Angular take care of all of these kind of annoying coordination bits, and then you can really focus on writing your styles in a very declarative way. So if you think about just kind of the crazy amount of things that you'd normally have to do to get an animation, for instance, let's say you're adding an element to the DOM and you want to do some animation as it's coming in. So first you have to maybe attach the element to the DOM, then you have to quickly set some class on it that lowers its opacity, then add the class that slowly fades it in. And like, that's a lot of work, and that code tends to be really imperative and just dirty up your application.
But it's even worse when you're removing stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because when you're removing stuff, when, let's say, you want something to animate away, you not only need to apply the proper classes and style these elements properly, but you also need to know when the transitions, when the CSS is done, and then remove the element from the DOM. Because if you remove it when you actually want to remove it from your, when the model disappears, then that's too early, and the element will just disappear, and no transition will appear.
Right, and it gets worse still if you have kind of multiple animations playing at once. So imagine you have some alert thing that you want to fade in, and inside of the alert there's some other additional animations that you want to do. So unless you're very careful, it's easy to have both those animations run at once, and the user doesn't actually see the animation side of this thing that's fading in, because it ends up running at the same time while it's fading. Right, so you have to coordinate animations and make sure that they're staggered based on where they're layered. So these are things that Angular can take care of for you, and this is actually how we have done our implementation of animations. So let's take a look at some actual code right now. So this is ngrepeat. By now you guys probably know this pretty well. What Angular is doing for you is it's providing these special CSS classes as hooks. So if you look in the CSS below, we have things like ngEnter and ngMove. And what Angular does is it automatically adds and removes these classes at the right time as is appropriate. So ngEnter is the class that Angular puts on some node in ngrepeat as a new item is added. Right? So if you push an item to this list, Angular is going to create a new DOM node, and that DOM node is going to have the ngEnter class on it. Then what it's going to do is it's going to use this ngEnter active class. And what this says is this is the final state that you want to be animating towards. So if you look in our CSS, we're using a transition of 0.5 seconds, linear, all properties. We start at 0, and then we're transitioning in that half a second to full opacity. And so the effect that you would see is when you add new items to this list, they'll fade in. And if you were to, for instance, sort the list, every element in there would kind of cross-fade, right? So it would fade out and fade back in. Similarly, over on this right column, we have ngleave. And ngleave follows the same convention. This is the class that gets added as Angular is removing something, but before it actually deletes the node. So this is actually the same thing, but it's using CSS3 animations with this kind of keyframe, like named keyframes, so you can take more control of it. And you could even say, at 50% in the middle of this animation, we'll change the background color to red, or it gives you a lot more knobs to turn.
Another interesting thing about this is that you don't actually specify in any way how long Angular has to wait until the end transition is done, except for the styling. So we actually look at the styles that you apply to classes to know when the animation is done or when the transition is done, and when we need to remove elements from DOM and do cleanup. So there's nothing that you have to worry about. We figure out everything based on the styles you apply to DOM nodes.
Right, and again, this is really important because typically you would have to keep these styles in sync with your JavaScript. And by keeping kind of these CSS declarations as the single place of truth for animations, it makes it very easy to keep your animations maintainable. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the API. So we saw for ngrepeat how this works. You have classes for enter, leave, and move. Incidentally, Angular provides these same kind of classes for any of the directives that it makes sense to. So any directives that are adding or removing elements, kind of changing visual behavior. So you can use this in ngview to transition between different routes in your application. You can use it with ngInclude, switch, if, ngClass, and then showing and hiding as well.
Right. And altogether, we support 5 different animation events. We saw enter, leave, and move. And in addition to these 2, we also have add class and remove class. And the central piece that orchestrates all of the manipulation, all the coordination of timings of things is this service called $animate. This is something that is used under hood by the ngrepeat, ngview, and all these other directives. But we also expose it to you, so should you have the need to write a directive or a component that needs to do something that should be enabled with animations, you can use the same service and then take advantage of this very declarative way of doing the animations in your application.
All right, so let's actually see what this looks like. So this is an awesome demo application by our good friend Matthias, who actually worked with us and did most of the work to implement this feature. So big thanks to him. This is an awesome application that uses the GitHub API, and you can search for different things, like maybe we could search Angular, right? And so one of the things that I really like about this is the way that it uses animations, right? It's animating in this list of things with ngrepeat downwards, so it kind of hints to the user, aha, there's more things if I scroll down. So I think that this is really cool. Let's see here. So you can click on one of these, and here you see a transition between the routes, kind of fading in between. I think the spinner stops as soon as all of these images are loaded and all of the text is there. But it's nice to give users a really quick feedback. So animations are cool, but we think that there's a lot of real value to end users when you use these kind of features to hint certain things to them. So you can click on these different things. You can search. It does all of this filtering. Really cool example.
What if we try to disable these animations? Like, would it be possible?
Yeah, let's take a look at how you'd even do that. So here's the code.
Let's talk about why would you want to disable animations?
All right, yeah, sure. Why would we, Igor?
So one of the use cases is that, for example, you want to do end-to-end testing. Like in your end-to-end testing, unless you're specifically testing animations, you want your end-to-end tests to be as fast as possible. And all these animations are going to slow down your end-to-end tests. So for the purposes of just testing the business logic, it's very convenient to be able to just disable all the animations very easily. And if you use Scenario Runner, if you use Protractor to write end-to-end tests for Angular applications, they will automatically disable animations for you.
Another reason might be you want to see what this looks like in browsers that don't have these new CSS3 capabilities. And so you could do this without firing up your old IE6 or IE8 VM by just taking this single module out of your application. So if we just delete this, we'll see the same application, but without the animations. Right? So let's go back home. You can see how this kind of flickers. It's a little bit more jarring. Right? So this disappears, it reappears. As you switch between these views, things just kind of pop into place. There's a lot of this reflowing.
It's definitely functional. It's just not as pleasant.
Right, exactly. So that's an awesome application that uses these animations. But let's take a deeper look into just one single use case. So this is actually a good opportunity to also talk about another new feature in Angular 1.2, that is touch support. So we have this new module, ngTouch, that gives you events like swipe left, swipe right, and let's use them just like you're used to using things like ngClick. So here's a quick example that we put together. This is kind of a common paradigm that you see on mobile, where you want to have this swipe left, swipe right to hide and show this. Right? So you could imagine this would, again, it wouldn't be nearly as useful without this animation. By having this left and right, you kind of suggest to users that if you do the same gesture in the opposite direction, you get the opposite effect. So let's see how this is implemented. So here we have some typical HTML. Here we're using the swipe left and swipe right to toggle this show property true and false. And then we're using ngIf to either add or remove this piece of DOM from our application.
ngIf is another directive that we added to Angular 1.2. It's one of the structural directives that just happen to be very useful, and it's a good enhancement.
Right. If you're used to ngShow, for instance, it's the same thing, but it actually removes the DOM element instead of just toggling a show hide class. Okay, so let's see what the code looks like for this. Ta-da, that's the code. So there's actually really no JavaScript that we had to write at all to be able to do this. And we think that's really cool. It keeps the separation of concerns and keeps your application clean and maintainable. So if we look at the CSS, this is actually where most of the action is happening. So we have a few kind of layout things at the top. Important to note here is we have this.
Can I make it bigger?
Yeah, of course. How's that?
Better.
That's better? Okay. So we have this transition property. You got to remember your vendor-specific prefixes for some of this stuff. So we're in 0.1 seconds, we're going to animate back and forth all of the properties on here. And then here is where we're using these special ngEnter active classes. So initially, when the node is added to the DOM, we want it translated to the right 100% of the width of this element. And then when it finishes, we want it to be 0% of the width offset. Then leave goes the opposite direction. And so this was super simple to implement this. I mean, it's very straightforward. All right. In fact, it's so simple that I have nothing else to say about it. Let's see another example. So we said you could animate ngView, for instance. So let's say you want to have a slideshow, right? So you can nicely translate these slides across as you're transitioning between them. Right? So let's see what the code looks like for this. Right, so we have this menu. It's using this routing that Mishko just talked about, where you're just navigating between these hrefs. In our application, we don't have very much code. All of the code that we have here is setting us up to do routing. And we're actually using another new feature introduced in 1.2. You can now provide a function to template URL, and it can return a certain path to load from. So in here, we're parsing out this number, and then we're loading the slide based on the number. And if we don't hit one of those, we go to the first slide.
Can we look at the DOM in the DOM inspector as we are going
Of course. Yeah. That might be a little bit too big. Can you still read that? A little bit bigger? Okay, so let's see what happens when we do this animation. So again, we can see here's our navigation. We have this ngrepeat, these links that it's making. That's not very interesting, though. Here we have the ngview, and then inside of it, this is one slide. Let's see what happens when we translate, or when we transition between slides. So if you notice very briefly there, you actually have two DOM elements. You have two copies of this ngview. And this is one of those cases that we're talking about where Angular handles this kind of complex, we want to add a node, we want both of them to animate, and then when the old route is finished animating, we want to remove it. And so again, these are concerns that we didn't have to address at all in our code. Angular takes care of them. Right, so I don't know if we actually showed you what the CSS looks like for this. So again, some layout stuff. For this one, in order to make sure that the slides as we're animating the new one, they didn't have this goofy offset, we had to position them absolutely at the top. So that's a common thing that you have to do when you're using ngview. And then again, we're using our good old friend transition and translate X just to get this kind of simple left and right movement.
Awesome.
All right, let's see what our last example is. So let's say you want to make something like a notifications system in your application, where you have these different messages that appear at the top and they animate out. So something like this is a good occasion to use ngrepeat. So we saw early on how to do this, but let's take a look at the actual code, see if I'm telling the truth about it being super easy. So here, this is an app that actually has some real business logic. Right? We have an array of alerts here, and we have this function that adds a new alert, clears the alert box, and then sets out a timeout so it removes old alerts after a couple seconds. Right? Back in our HTML, we're using this controller. We have this kind of container for the different notifications. And then here's our ngrepeat that's just printing the text in there. Okay, and there we go. Okay, yeah, that's just printing the text in there. And then at the bottom here, you can see where we bind to these controls so that we can add new things. Again, CSS. It's fairly simple. This time we're also animating on opacity, and we can translate Y, and that's also just as simple to do. So again, it might be interesting to take a look with our handy web inspector. We see we can add all of these. Oops, I guess you can't see it. we can be adding multiple things, and Angular is smart enough about coordinating animations that it seamlessly handles adding and removing multiple things at once concurrently, and it does the right thing. So that's really cool. Normally, something like this might be a little bit more of a pain to implement, I would imagine.
Yeah. I used to implement slide deck before we had all these animations in Angular, and it was such a pain just coordinating all the events. It's horrible.
All right, so all of this code is up on GitHub. I'm BT for it on GitHub, and the repo is called Brian Talks About Animations. So it's up there if you want to look at these code examples, play around with it yourself some. All right, back to slideshow. All right, so animations are pretty new, but we already have a couple things that we want to keep in mind when using this feature. So they're very powerful, but you have to be careful. So you should be tasteful. Use animations really when they help your users or when they hint useful things. They should enhance the usability. Your application should work exactly the same, but now you're just giving users little hints and a little bit better experience when they have a browser that can support these things. And you should keep them fast. You should keep them fast. There's lots of good advice from our friends on the Chrome DevRel team. They have lots of these videos on jank busting and kind of finding slow areas in your apps. But they have a great article on html5rocks.com about these different things. So basically, you want to know which things browsers can animate cheaply. Typically, these things are it's easy to implement hardware acceleration for them. You should really try your best to use the tools that you have. So Chrome has an excellent inspector that lets you see how long different parts of your CSS are affecting these different kind of paints and layouts that happen. And hopefully, browsers will continue to get better at animating more quickly, but you can always do your best.
But not too quickly.
Right, but not too quickly. So those are just some things to keep in mind.
Okay. So with animations, so this actually brings us very nicely to another enhancement that we made in Angular. We already talked about ngrepeat. One thing that we didn't talk about is that ngrepeat is stable. What do we mean by this? And this is not obvious until you dig in and start observing what is happening under the hood. Angular creates this very tight association between the model in a collection and the items or the DOM nodes that were produced by the ngrepeat for this item in the collection. So every time you push something into a collection, ngrepeat will stamp out a bunch of DOM nodes that represent this item and visually display to the user. And it keeps track and it keeps an association between these two. What this means is that if you sort your collection, let's say you have an array of names and you just sort it by a different key or something, then Angular will actually take all the DOM nodes in the document and reorder them. It will not destroy everything and recreate all the DOM nodes or just update the values of existing DOM nodes. It will take the DOM nodes that represent each of the items in the collection and just move them around. This is nice, and it's most of the time it's a desirable feature, especially if you want to animate things like sorting. But it also means that if you are dealing with database refreshes, a common pattern is to not update the collection, just throw away a collection and just put a new collection on the scope and have Angular refresh the view. What this would, however, mean is that Angular would think, hey, the whole collection that was previously rendered disappeared and a new one is in its place. So I need to animate all the stuff away and bring new stuff in. And for the user, that will be really confusing because the user will keep on seeing the same thing and just went away and came back, and now maybe one or two properties are different. So what we want to be able to do is, in this particular case, we want to have more control over how ngrepeat keeps this association between the model and the DOM. And we introduce a track by keyword to do that. So this allows you to tell Angular that, oh, don't really look at the identity of the items in the collection, but look at in this case, o.id. So there's an ID property that is unique in our application, and use this to keep track of identity of the model. And you can do this with animations, or you can use this in other scenarios. Sometimes it can help you with performance. Next slide. Controller paths.
So, speaking of tackling these kind of tricky issues, 1.2 also introduces this new controller as syntax that solves a very subtle problem. So if you look at this code above, let's say you have a user controller that exposes some scope.name, and you want to be able to bind to it, and you have an ng model that you want to bind to it nested inside of an ngIf. And this isn't too unusual. Maybe you want to hide editing a user profile unless they click the user profile tab or something. The problem with this is that ngIf creates its own scope, and so when you end up typing into this input, you're updating ngIf's scope's name, not the name of the user controller. So if that's a little bit complicated, it's because, or if that sounds complicated, it's because it is a little bit complicated. But if you use Angular a bit and you kind of start digging into how scopes work, you can pretty easily see this sort of issue. So one way that we can address this is by kind of making it easier to be explicit about which scope a certain property is on. So that's what controller as can do for you. So with controller as, we're saying we're going to publish this user controller as user, as the name user onto the scope. And then when we want to change this user.name, we can be explicit and say we want to change the name property of user and not some other one. So then this works inside of this ngIf, because inside of ngIf there is no user property, so it goes up one scope and it sees, aha, user controller is exposed as user, I'm going to write the name property there. And so that really easily solves your problem. Right.
So about 2 years ago, that was before 1.0, we went through a security review of Angular inside of Google, and we very thoroughly went through like everything that Angular does, how it works with the security team. And to our surprise, they identified some issues, but not too many. And we learned a whole bunch of stuff back then that we didn't know. And it was a very good experience for us. So just before 1.2, we thought it would be a good time to do a refresher of the security review. So we went through this again, and we identified several other things that we could do better to make the applications more secure. And one of them is, for example, template origin. We think that it could put, there's a potential of using Angular templates to execute attacks against Angular applications. And that's because Angular templates are so powerful. So it's really important that we actually trust the templates that Angular application is using, especially those that are lazily loaded into the application at runtime. So what we introduced is a feature where we actually check the origin of the application, and we trust only templates that come from the same origin or origins that are whitelisted specifically by the developer. The other security enhancements that we did, we further hardened the expression sandbox. So this is the context in which all the expressions execute. In 1.0, we introduced support for CSP, Content Security Policy. This is something that all Chrome apps use, and also it's starting to be used in production deployments where security is a concern, and the deployment or the administrators want to have really tight control over where scripts can be fetched from, what kind of operations can be executed in the browser. So in Angular 1.2, we further enhanced the support, and we made it even easier to use it. And with new features in CSP that were introduced recently, we just automatically detect CSP and do stuff right out of the box without you having to do anything. And the last feature I want to talk about is the strict contextual escaping. This is something that is very deep in the core of Angular, and it's not obvious, but Angular does a lot of DOM manipulation, and almost all of these DOM operations are safe. If you know the difference between text content and inner HTML, this is what it boils down to. Like whenever you have a string and you use DOM node.text content and you just assign the string to text content, this is a safe operation because the browser will automatically escape the string, and even if the string contains HTML, it will be displayed in the raw form in the browser. Whereas if you use inner HTML, this is browsers or HTML's way of doing eval. You take a string and you evaluate it in the context of HTML, so you actually instantiate DOM nodes. And this could be a security risk. You could add things to the DOM that you don't want to have in the DOM. For example, you can load scripts or execute scripts or load images that you might not want. So in Angular, almost all operations are secure. We use inner HTML or other safe variants of DOM manipulation. We use other safe DOM manipulation APIs. There is one that is using inner HTML, and that is ngbind HTML. Usually, ngbind HTML uses inner HTML under the hood. And for this one, it's really important that we trust the model, the string that is being used for this operation. But how can you trust this string when it just floats and pretty much anything can just write to scope and change the model? So it could easily be that the user input could be considered as input into this unsafe operation, or the input could come from URL or from database. And there is no way to really make sure that the input is safe and can be inner HTML. So for auditing purposes, this is a nightmare, because you have to look at where does this model come from? Like, how is it possible that all the possible values in this context can be safe? And strict contextual auto-escaping can help with this. And the way it does so is, can we go to the next slide? We have a string value which we can wrap into a wrapper that is trusted and is stamped to be safely used in the HTML context. And this wrapper can then be unwrapped by any kind of component that needs to use string, but wants this string to be trusted and to be approved for use in this sensitive context. So in this case, it's the HTML context. So in our case, the ngbind HTML, it just uses this wrapper, these wrappers as the input, and will unwrap the string and make sure that only safe strings can be used for inner HTML. You can use SCE at your database layer, and this means that all of this stamping and approval of safe data is happening only in one place in the application, and this makes auditing of the applications very easy.
Hey guys, hold on a second.
Uh-oh. Oh. Error messages, look at that. It almost looks like error message. Okay.
All right, let's. There. Did you guys get a good look at that? No?
That's fine.
Well, slides will be up somewhere.
Yeah, slides will be online. So, improved error messages. Like, there is nothing more frustrating than when you work on the application and the application is broken and you're getting this error message that is completely useless and just makes you angry because you don't know how to react to it and you don't know what to do to make your application work again. This maybe was a case in Angular as well, I'm not going to say.
Well, at any rate, we thought that this was a good opportunity because if you can produce an error message that leads developers further along in solving their problem and in learning what caused the problem in the first place, rather, that's a useful way to even kind of teach Angular as you go.
So what we did is we went through the entire Angular code base and we identified all the places where we generate error messages, and we identified unique identifiers to every single place in the code base. And in addition to that, we also provided you with a very descriptive error message that tells you more about what is happening and what you should do about it. But that is often not sufficient because in console there is only so much space that we can use to print something. So we also created a documentation page for every single error message that you can go to, and this page will tell you this is the error, these are the common situations when the error occurs, and these are the ways how you can solve or mitigate the problem. This is what the page looks like. And the link to this page is provided in the error message that is thrown in the console, so you can just click on it. But as we were doing this, we realized that all these error messages were starting to take up a lot of space, a lot of bytes in the payload of the minified Angular. And this has become an issue. So we thought about, how could we deal with this? And the solution we came up with was, since we already have these unique identifiers for each of the error messages, let's just throw away the error message itself. Let's just keep all the variables, display those in the production mode, and provide the link, which will allow you to reconstruct the error message should you need it. So what this means is that the minified Angular doesn't actually contain all these bulky error message strings, but it still allows you to see the error messages in production and reconstruct them should you need to get more information about what is happening. So in development, you definitely want to use the non-minified version of Angular because that's more user-friendly. It gives you the error message right in console. But in production, you get the same information should you need it. But there is lots more features that we don't have time to cover. Like we already saw ngIf, We extended the expression language by adding operators like ternary operator and a bunch of others. We have the whole module on touch gestures and stuff like that. We improved the networking layer, HTTP. We enhanced the promises, ton of stuff. There's almost 1,600 comments that landed between 1.0.0 and 1.2.0. We closed a lot of issues, and we're hoping that all these improvements will make it much more enjoyable for you to use Angular and build applications with it.
All right, and so if at the end of this 3-hour session you're not tired of Angular yet, we actually have another session today going over advanced AngularJS features, mostly directives.
Yeah, we're going to focus on building components with AngularJS, so if that's something that you're interested in, please join us at 1:30.
Tomorrow I'm giving a talk on testing Angular in using Karma, our test runner. And then we have a meetup on Wednesday. And then
free beer.
Yes, there's free beer. So if you're tired of Angular but you like free beer, you can also come. And then Thursday, Mishka will be talking a little bit about what the future of AngularJS will look like, we think.
Awesome. Oh yeah. So there is a bunch of other talks that are happening here at Devoxx. There is a Dart talk on Angular Dart. There is also at least one presentation about Angular and building applications with Angular that is not from our team. And I saw another talk on Karma, so you're encouraged to go check those out.
Yes, there are many Angular experts among you that aren't giving talks as well, it seems. So.
Very good, so
Yes.
that we don't have to speak that much.
So, any questions?
We're going to be around the whole week, so just grab us in the hallway or come to workshop or the meetup, and there will be lots of opportunities to talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.